We've heard this week from U.S. officials that it's not impossible for Israel to come up with a plan that they would support for operations in Rafah, although if the U.S. had their way, it would be much more targeted operations as opposed to full-scale operations. That being said, the U.S. has not seen any Israeli plans yet.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, since we last talked, there had been ongoing tensions between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government over Israel-Hamas war, but things seem to have really taken a turn for the worse in terms of the two governments' relations. Talk a little bit about what the sticking points might be.
Right now, the big sort of back and forth, the debate between the Netanyahu government and the Biden administration is over Rafah. Now, we've talked about Rafah a lot over the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
It's the southernmost city in Gaza. It's on the Gaza-Egyptian border. It has more than 1 million Palestinians in this tiny city because so many of them fled south as they were instructed to do by the Israeli military. That being said, Israel has said this is the one place left as they've sort of gone from north to south in their operations, left for them to sort of conduct large-scale operations to target the Hamas fighters in the region. And so Netanyahu maintains that for Israel to meet its war objectives, it has to go into Rafah. Now, because there's so many civilians there, the U.S., the UN, dozens of governments literally have said they would not support Israeli full-scale military operations without significant coordination of how to keep the civilians safe in that area. We heard President Biden last weekend say that this was a red line for him, that he would not support full-scale military operations in Rafah. At the same time, he also said he wouldn't leave Israel completely high and dry with all the support the U.S. provides militarily,
Right.
But it was a very strong stance from the president. And then we heard Netanyahu reiterate his sentiment, furthering this disagreement, that a red line for him was losing this war.
Right.
And so it just furthered this debate about what should happen in Rafah. We've heard this week from U.S. officials that it's not impossible for Israel to come up with a plan that they would support for operations in Rafah, although if the U.S. had their way, it would be much more targeted operations as opposed to full-scale operations. That being said, the U.S. has not seen any Israeli plans yet.
What's the status of aid going into Gaza at the moment?
So that's the hot topic, and there are two separate aspects of this question of aid. The first is how much aid is getting to Gaza's borders, and then the ability for institutions within Gaza to distribute it throughout the Strip. And so we've seen many institutions, the U.S., the UN, call for additional aid to reach Gaza's shores. And so President Biden, in his State of the Union, announced that he was directing the U.S. to create a port in the Mediterranean Sea off Gaza's coast,
Right.
Which will allow for a flourish of aid to get into Gaza. Now, a couple things about that. Number one, it would take about 60 days or so for the military to get this up and running. We're now about a week into that 60-day analysis, so it would be a little bit more than 50 at this point.
Sure.
It'll require more than 1,000 soldiers to be off the coast to keep this up and running. And so the U.S. has been adamant that they won't be going into Gaza, but they'll still be right on the shores of Gaza.
I mean, there would be some exposure to risk then at that point.
Absolutely. And so that's something we've heard from critics who say this puts U.S. forces in jeopardy. We don't know exactly who would maintain security of the port, whether that would be left to Israeli forces to coordinate the security for it, or how exactly that'll play out. One other thing to note is that the U.S. is dropping aid into Israel. They're going soon to by sea, and they're also doing it by land through 2 border crossings in Israel. That being said, administration officials say getting aid in by land is the most efficient way to do it, and it's the way to get the most aid in. And so we saw earlier this week the Israelis open up a new crossing in the northern part of Gaza, which will allow for aid to get to northern Gaza. Northern Gaza is the area within the Strip that is most that needs aid most, and a big part of that is because even though So many people fled south at the destruction of the Israeli military. There's still about 300,000 people there, and there's no real government entity anymore now that the Israeli military took out Hamas. So it's very lawless in this area. There's not a lot of organization or structure to get aid to the people who need it in this area, and we've seen from various institutions that they're saying that these people are on the brink of famine at this point.
So there's another trouble spot in the world, and that's Haiti. Talk us through a little bit this whole situation in Haiti and what the United States is doing to help.
So the U.S., first and foremost, the military has sent a team of Marines down to evacuate non-essential personnel out of the embassy, but it's not a full-scale non-combatant evacuation operation yet. That's still on the table from what we've heard from defense forces, different defense sources. That being said, to back up, the president of Haiti has announced he will resign. And in part, the reason that prompted it is, if you'll remember, the former president was assassinated in 2021,
right.
And his successor announced that there would be elections earlier this month and then postponed them. So it created a lot of uproar within the city and the country.
Right.
And we've seen a number of very powerful gangs carry out simultaneous and sometimes organized attacks against government entities, calling for his resignation, which they've since succeeded in obtaining. That being said, we're still waiting to see who could be the successor and whether what has already been agreed upon, but an outside military presence will come in and support whatever interim prime minister is selected.
And there have been periods of government instability in Haiti for quite a long time.
That's right. So this is not necessarily a new situation that's ongoing, but the U.S. is hoping to bring some stability in the region.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.